Imagine someone took your brother, your father, your mother, your family. Imagine they took your language. Imagine they took your identity. Now, imagine surviving anyway. Hello, my name is William Habas Singh, a 17-year-old high school student who happens to have Indigenous ancestry. And I want to talk about two Indigenous texts that I read throughout grade 11 English, Someday by Drew Hayden Taylor and The Mare Thieves by Sherry DeMaline. Both stories cover a very difficult topic: what happens when people are stripped of their culture, and more importantly, how do they fight to get it back. These texts show us that culture and identity can still survive after years of oppression on people, and they also inspire us and teach us and motivate us to preserve culture, to listen to Indigenous voices, and to take action instead of remaining as a passive bystander. Someday tells the story of Anne, an Indigenous mother whose daughter was taken from her during the 60s scoop. The 60s scoop was an event in the 60s in Canada where Indigenous children were ripped from their families and placed into non-Indigenous homes. This effect lasted generations. One of the best examples from the novel is Anne's husband, Frank. When Anne first meets Frank, she describes him as a very confident and otherworldly man, a very charismatic man. When Reese's folks stare him down, he stares them back and he fights back their oppression and their fear-mongering. But he's a very different man after the 60s scoop. After the 60s scoop, when his daughter is taken away, he simply says, "She's somebody else now. She's dead to us." Think about that. The government didn't just take his child, they took his hope. The old Frank would have fought back, he would have fought to death, but the new Frank just accepts it, he submits to it. This really emphasizes and shows the effect of oppression on families and how it runs through generations. But beyond all of this, Anne still believes that she can get her daughter back. She still has hope. She still believes, she still dreams of seeing Grace again, her daughter. And that's her form of resistance, hope. And that should be taken as a lesson that hope is one of the greatest forms of resistance, because you're never giving up on someone, you're never giving up on something. You're always willing to fight for it because you have that positive feeling in you, that optimistic feeling in you that maybe I can get that back. So our hope is the act of resistance. But Someday isn't the only story about identity and culture being threatened. The Mare Thieves holds a future where Indigenous people are hunted down for their ability to dream, while others can't. Author Sherry DeMaline is an Indigenous writer, a Metsi writer, who creates this very dystopian world to reflect real Indigenous history and the past. And it's really, the novel is a reflection of the history. In the novel, recruiters hunt Indigenous down for their bone marrow, which it gives them the ability to dream. And at first, it's a very extreme sounding plot or very extreme sounding topic, but it really is just a metaphor for the real world, for the past. The bone marrow being their culture. People trying to take away what makes the Indigenous Indigenous. Their language, their culture, their memories, their identities, their stories, their traditions. All these things that make Indigenous who they are. One moment that really still sticks out for me in the novel is Migwin's story, where he kind of explains how the world collapsed and how things came to be. And when you listen to it, you read it, and you realize it's not truly like fiction, like I said earlier. It's really a metaphor for the real world, as I just said, right? The recruiters aren't main antagonists or villains, which they seem like it, but they're really just a representation of, or a symbolic way to represent the system which tried to erase Indigenous people and their cultures and their identities, right? Residential schools, 60s scoop, forced assimilation, and just torture by the Europeans when they first settled here, and even like 60 years back, when, not even 30 years back, when people were still being discriminated against and felt bad for being who they were. The reason these books matter is because their main messages, their lessons, are not truly fiction. They are really just for the real world. They connect directly to our history as a nation, to the things that we've done so terribly. Right? The 60s scoop happened, residential schools, they happened. This all happened. And many indigenous communities still feel those effects today. There's still people who live in poverty, people who are full of traumatic experiences and trauma and terrible relationships. It's all because of these past things that happened to their people. But the stories really emphasize and show something that's equally important. Culture survived, people survived, language survived, identity survived, right? You notice the repetition that it's survived, 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 survived. That's a really big author or message that the authors want to remind us, that the indigenous people are people of survival, they're people of resistance. These things can survive, and you should have hope that they will, but you still need to fight for that. As someone who is Metsi through my mother's side, these stories felt a little more personal to me. I have met people and I know people that have gone through some sort of trauma or still feel it to this day. I haven't directly experienced it myself. I'm a very white-looking person in general, and that's my culture, that's my identity, that's where I grew up, but I still understand that that is something that my people have lived through, my grandfather has lived through, and that possibly cousins or other relatives can still live through today. My last message is really to first summarize these things I said, but summarize them through a call to action, where the world does not change because people say it should change, or people call it problems that are apparent that they see in the world. Changes should be made because people act on them. Bystanders, normal people, we should all act on these things that we think or we know should change, right? You should learn about Indigenous history. You should read Indigenous stories, as grade 11 English teaches us to. You should listen to Indigenous voices with actual passion, actual meaning, instead of just blanking off and going through it for English class. We should protect cultures that others have tried to destroy, because it's an obligation, it's a responsibility to the human race. And change, that begins when people decide all together that someone's well-being, someone's culture, someone's identity, someone's story is worth fighting for. And maybe we can't change the past. We can learn from it, definitely. But we can decide what will happen tomorrow, what will happen next, and ultimately what will happen someday.